Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to be talking about Microsoft Copilot for Power BI. I know it's only been out for a few months and it's still in preview, so officially it's too early to draw major conclusions. However, I have been playing with it for some time and I have some thoughts to share, so I think it's going to be an interesting video for you guys. So at high level, Microsoft Copilot can be used in the following fashion. Number one, it can be used online, and number two, it could be used in the desktop. When you're online, it could be used for Power BI mode. It could be used in two modalities. Number one, it could be used when you're looking at the report in the view mode. And number two, you could be using Microsoft Copilot when you're designing your report. And I know the first question that you're probably asking is, hey, Andrew, why are we looking at this ridiculous report? Well, I thought it was fitting to use this specific report because if you're an OG for Power BI, if you've been around with Power BI like I have since the very beginning, then you have seen this report in some way, shape, or form. Actually, you still see it on some of the Microsoft branded blogs and posts still. You could still see the same data set, but this is the data set that we share with Microsoft at a very, very early stage. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that for the first 6 or 12 months, this was the number1 deployed dashboards and model in Power BI services. Everybody was trying to understand what Power BI can do and how it works. So I thought it would only be fitting to use this archaic model. I haven't looked at it for probably 10 or more years to see if I deploy this in Power BI today and if I can stick Copilot on this, what kind of insights and what can we glean from some archaic Power BI model as this. So let's take a look at what we could do with Copilot. So the first thing that you need to be aware of that Copilot is not really available unless you have a pretty big and expensive capacity provisioned. So you have to have at least a P1 or an F64 capacity provision and configured for your workspace. How that gets done, all the sausage making is beyond the scope of this video, but basically what happens once it's done, you will see the following option in your report. So let me see. So here you will see this little Copilot button available, and if you click on that, that's going to launch you in a Copilot experience. So let's just do that. So now we see Copilot is launched. Let me make myself a little bit smaller so we have some more real estate and you guys can see everything. So let me do that. And now we can start playing with our dashboard. So right now the dashboard is into read-only view, in exploration view. So it's not in a design view. And we see two options. And the two options are create the bulleted list of insights. And the next one is create summarize visuals on this page. So you can also get more options if you click on this little icon here. So what happens here is you can see that you could click on those little stars and then you will have a couple more options. So if I click on this, you see what it's called a prompt guide. So we have an option to give an executive summary for this report, summarize visual on the page, and create bulleted list of insights. So let's just start with the very first option. So here our data set is exploring a bunch of district managers at the bottom. We have our stores on the right. We have a high-level product breakdown in terms of variance for last year. Here we have a time element. Here we have a trend of sales, and then here we have a breakdown of how our classes are performing in terms of meeting the expectations, top 10 or top 11 classes. So let's click on the create a bulleted list of insights and see what it generates. So it says working on it. Okay, I actually had to refresh the page because initially when I clicked on that option, it ran for a couple of minutes and didn't do anything. So I had to refresh the page, but now we can actually see the bullet points that are generated. So we see that the highest volume of total sales year to date. We have some other information. It says that the division 020 men's show the highest loss. So we generate a bunch of bullet points for us that summarizes what we see on this report. Now, please note that what it generated is only limited to the images, or rather the visuals that you see on this report. It seems to me that it does not really run anything on the model itself. It's only analyzing the story that the visuals are telling on this particular page. And I think there is an option to analyze either current page or multiple pages. but the insight is strictly based on the visuals that we can see with our own eyes. The next option is to summarize visuals on this page. So let's click on this and see what that does. So now the summarized visuals has run as well. And the insight that we see is that there are 9 district managers identified. It lists who they are. And then again, it's giving us a high-level summary of what's already available on the page. And it's also listing a couple of postal codes, base data areas where it saw the highest sales for this year. What's cool is it's also creating this bookmark. So as you're looking at these results and bullet points, by you clicking on this bookmark, you will see how those different elements get selected on the page. So that's actually pretty cool. So as you read the summaries, you could click on the bookmarks, and that brings that particular salient point to focus. Now you can ask a bunch of questions and interact with this dashboard by asking other questions limited to what's available in these visuals. But what I would rather do is let's jump into the edit experience and see what's available there. In order to do this, let's click on edit. So by default, as we can see, Copilot is not there. So we're going to click on Copilot. And what I will do is I will minimize visualizations and data panes just so that we have a little bit more real estate. So now I have 2 options: suggest content for this report and create page that shows XYZ. So let's do suggest content for this report. Now, what happens when we pick that option, it actually is giving us a capability to add something to the report itself. So now we are creating things. So it says that based on what it figured out, that you could sales performance by store, you could do item profitability by category, you could do sales trends by products, and sales goals and status by district. So let's create a sales performance by store page and see how well it does that job. So that's pretty cool. The fact that it's actually creating a page from scratch by just analyzing what's in the model already is obviously very cool. The question is, does it make sense, and how useful is this really? So at the top, we will see our KPIs. One thing you will notice that the theme and kind of the design pattern, design thinking of how these pages are generated are very similar. So you will see KPIs at the top. You will see your drop downs at the top right, which actually I think the filters is interesting, that it chooses to put filters right on the page instead of using the filter pane. I don't know if it's a limitation of the tool right now that it's not able to add filters to the filter pane, or whether Microsoft now thinks that that's a better design pattern. Now here we have a trend for all of our stores. Now we have hundreds, I think, plus stores. So this chart is a little bit nonsensical. Then here we have total sales by latitude and longitude, which also is pretty funny. If you remember in the original page, what we do is we color the stores by chain, and you will notice in the original page, let me see if I can find it, that it's been a while since I looked at the store, but what's interesting here, the way this data is synthesized, is that the smaller chain is, so one of the chains has a bunch of small stores that are very profitable, and the other chain has a bunch of larger stores that are not as profitable. So you see a bunch of green buttons, green bullets rather. Those are the bubbles that represent one smaller stores. Then you have large bubbles that represent the store with bigger the chain with bigger stores. So let's see if it was able to detect this here. So now let's see if it carried over the same understanding of how stores are grouped into this report, and we see that it didn't. So Fashions Direct, these are the stores that are the larger stores that are in the north. And then Lindsay's is the chain that has a bunch of smaller stores in the south, but we see that Copilot was not smart enough to apply that filter here to make it easier for us to distinguish how the store distribution is different by chain. Now it does know that there is 2 chains, so there is a KPI for count of chain. Again, it's not particularly insightful, but it's cool that it's thinking about it. The other thing that I think is peculiar is the use of a pie chart. Normally, it's something that's frowned upon in our community. I guess it makes sense sometimes to break up the flow, but if you have a bunch of different bar charts, to introduce something that just stands out. So I'll give them a pass on that. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to describe the report that we would like to create in this box here. I know it's hidden behind me, so I'm just gonna read you what I'm typing. So I'm gonna say, please create a report that helps me understand who my best district manager is. So let's run that and see what it generates. So now this report is a little bit disappointing because it does not seem like Copilot was able to infer that when I talk about district manager, I'm talking about people, not necessarily districts. So we see a bunch of charts with districts on them, and we also see sales by district name. We see gross margin amount, we could see division. So we have a bunch of information on this report, but it does not really help me understand who my top district managers are. And we will talk about why I think this is happening and whether it's a limitation of Copilot, whether it's something that I will speculate will get better over time or not, given from what I kind of feel I get so far with the tool. But we could spend hours having fun building a bunch of reports. Let's take a look at some other features of Copilot. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna delete a couple of charts here, and I'm gonna create a narrative visual. So where is this? Let's see if I can find it. I'm gonna resize it. So now we have a narrative visual that also is able to use Copilot to create some insights for us. So let's click on Copilot and see what kind of narrative this visual can generate. So here we have also three options. We have give an executive summary, answer likely questions from leadership, or create a bulleted list of things. So let's start with give an executive summary. So all I'm gonna do is click on the prompt and then click on create. Looks like we have limitations of up to 300 characters. And this narrative is gonna reference the entire report, I guess, instead of the specific page. So let's click on create and see what it generates. A few years ago, this natural language processing and the summaries or narrative feature was extremely popular with a bunch of companies. It was a sought out feature, and I don't think this feature is as popular these days. And partly I think is because of the quality of insight that these tools seem to auto-generate. I will let you read the summary that it generated, but as you look at it, you will clearly distinguish that there is not a whole lot of aha and gotchas in this text. It basically just summarizes some of the output of the charts that are scattered all over the report. Now I can spend probably half an hour on just that narrative visual alone, talk about its features, talk about how to format it. For now, I think that kind of gives you a flavor for what it does and how useful it might be. And let's take a look at now Power BI Desktop and see what Copilot can help us there. Okay, so now we're looking at the desktop file. Again, word of caution, this model was built more than 10 years ago, way before Power BI could make colors, and a lot of DAX functions were not available. So you will see some funny DAX in this model. But hey, we had to do what we could with what we had, so there you go. By looking at the desktop on its own right now, there's no Copilot options anywhere, but we know that if I go to the model view, and then if I go into one of my measures, now I see an option right here to create a description of a measure using Copilot. So let's see how well that works. So I'm gonna click on create with Copilot. It's done with preview, and what it does, it says the COGS measure represents the total cost of goods sold. It's calculated by summing up the blah, blah, blah field in the model. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep it. Let me zoom in on this so you guys can see the actual DAX that's generated. Now, you could see that COGS description now is populated with this field. And now I could save it, and now I have this metadata available. The issue is it seems like it's only doing one measure at a time. So if you have hundreds, and some of us have many hundreds of measures in the bigger models, this could be pretty laborious, but hopefully this feature is only a V1, and we're gonna see a lot more robust capabilities coming out. Okay, now let's generate a description for another measure. So this one calculates variance for units sold. And what it does, it says, hey, if no units were sold last year, just don't even generate the variance, just ignore ignore it. Sometimes we want to show just this year value. Sometimes for this particular use case, if this item was not sold last year, then I don't want to know about it. So let's see what it will generate with Copilot in terms of the description of the field. So it says this measure calculates the variance in total sales units between this year TY and last year LY, so it's smart enough to figure that out. If there is no sales units last year, the measure will return a blank value. So that's actually pretty good. So what I can see is that one thing that Copilot does really well, it understands DAX, and then it can translate DAX into English pretty well. So let's keep that. And for now, that's going to be all time we spend on Copilot in Power BI Desktop. And now it's time for food for thought. So I'm back into my reading view for the store performance retail analysis sample data set. I'm going to click on Copilot again, and I'm just going to ask it 2 questions, and let's see what it generates. Okay, and the question I'm going to ask is, what is my worst performing division? And what I'm going to do is I have a year-over-year variance by division. Let me zoom in. So you could see that the worst division is men's, right? So it's almost $1.3 million negative variance. In our home division, we have almost $1.2 million variance. So I'm going to ask Copilot, what is my worst performing division? And let's see what kind of answer it generates. So I'm going to launch this. And the answer is this. Based on year-over-year sales variance, the worst performing division is 20 men's, with a drop of sales of 1.29 million when compared to previous period. And that is correct. If I look at this, then we see that that insight is actually correct. So let's ask the question in a little bit more sophisticated way. So my next question is, what is my worst performing division in relative and absolute terms? So now I actually wanted to not just scrape the visual, but actually put some thinking in and try to put things in context. And the worst performing division in absolute terms is men's, which has seen a drop in year-over-year sales of 1.3 million. In relative terms, as the report does not provide division-specific sales data, it's impossible to calculate which division had the worst performance. So let's do this. Let's change the page, and we'll add a table with missing data and see if Copilot will be able to do a better job if I add a little bit more data on this page. Okay, so now let's see what I just did. I've made the report even more ugly, and I added another table to this report that actually breaks down my division by total sales this year versus total sales last year. So now let's paste our query. What is my worst performing division in relative and absolute terms? And see what Copilot thinks about that now, because I should have all of the data available to answer these questions right here. So now let's take a look at the answer. So let's zoom in. It says in absolute terms, the worst performing division is hosiery with total sales of $11 million. And in relative terms, the division men's has the worst performance with year-over-year sales variance of 1.3 million. So basically, to look at the variance, we look at this chart. To look at the absolute terms, we look at this chart. So this is interesting, but that's not what I meant when I asked this question. What I meant was relative to, and everything here I'm trying to understand this year versus last year. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, I may have a product that's a huge portion of my category. So in absolute terms, I might have a $10 million variance. But if I have a smaller product, we could have a 50% variance. So depending on how big the product is, absolute and relative terms variance will be different. So basically what I wanted it to do was compute the variance percent based on total sales and total sales this year from this table and put this table in perspective. But Copilot was not smart enough to do that, or at least it didn't understand, couldn't infer my intent from my prompt. And now it's time for food for thought. What do I think about this technology? And this is not an easy question, because on one hand, I appreciate the ingenuity and innovation and all the effort that went into bringing this feature forward for us all to enjoy, and we're still not 100% sure what kind of aim for this feature ultimately will be. So we can only take a look at it in the context for what's available right now. For me to talk about this, I have to go back and think about how I felt when I was first exposed to ChatGPT. So in our world, we have gone through the evolution of all the gimmicky demo / POC technologies that came in over the last 10 or 15 years. First, people were trying to bring statistics and regressions into the fold. So we saw a bunch of multivariate regression analysis and other things coming in. Then we saw ML come in, then it was all about neural networks, and then now LLM, large language model, is all the buzz. The problem was before, when all of those technologies were exposed, really it spun off so many POCs and proof of concepts and demos, and it really was a lot of buzz. But I would argue none of that really materialized, because the main issue with all of those technology was that whatever recommendation that it inferred and shared with its users, we had the hardest time explaining to the business audience as to how good those recommendations are. So models a lot of times were overfit, so there was a bunch of issues. Demos were amazing, POCs went really well, production deployments we saw very rarely. Then ChatGPT came to the scene, and that was the first time, and I was extremely skeptical. When somebody shared with me about ChatGPT, I had skeptical hippo eyes. I was like, there's no way, and I was basically not all that impressed. However, after the first, I would say 2, 3, 5 minutes of working with the tool, I had butterflies in my stomach. I was like, oh my God, this thing genuinely really understands what I'm trying to talk about, what I'm talking about, and it also understands the context, and it has all of the understanding of the problem domain that I'm dealing with. So I could talk about sales, I can talk about quota attainment, I could talk about market share analysis, I could talk about new product launches. So all of the topics that I decided to poke at with ChatGPT, it had the context, it understood what I was trying to say, and everything that it came back with in terms of recommendation, or just clearing things up, or just refinement, or just brainstorming, it was very relevant. I'm not getting the same feeling when I'm working with Copilot. Maybe just not yet. Basically, what's missing, and before I talk about what's missing, basically what I see right now is the following. It's looking at all of the charts that are on a page, and it's effectively just summarizing the information that I'm already exposed to, just using English language. So it's not smart enough to understand how the model is set up. I saw some things on how to make models more optimized for Copilot that talk about relationships, that talk about synonyms, that talk about a bunch of different things. So far, it does not seem to me that that information is being utilized to provide the insights that we're seeing coming back to us. The other thing that I think is really interesting, and I want to bring up to your attention, is the following. So if you look into the Microsoft Copilot Fabric overview, this sentence I find really, really interesting. It says Copilot sends your customer data to generate summaries to Azure OAI, where it's stored for 30 days. I find this extremely interesting, and I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit for the following reason. Today, in order for me to use Copilot, I need to be in a P1 or F64 capacity. P1 I think is roughly $4 or $5 grand list price, and F64 capacity is somewhere around $9,000 list price, so it's extremely expensive. I'm not quite sure why we need so much hardware to do what it seems to be doing right now. If all it does is scrapes the data of the existing charts and sends it back, I'm sure it's like a service from Azure OAI, and then Azure OAI is the actual component that returns the English text back to us. I'm not really sure what exactly I need the P1 and F64 capacity for if I'm using a common service where actually my data is stored for 30 days. The big question is, what does Copilot know about my data? What does Copilot really understand about my data? How much does Copilot understand the problem domain? So does it understand we talk about sales? Does it understand we talk about pipeline management or campaign effectiveness or inventory management or on-time and full reporting, financial reporting, doesn't understand how to use a different exchange rates when we do balance sheet versus income statement reporting, it does not seem to be that intelligent quite yet. I would love to have Microsoft or somebody from Microsoft to explain to us what exactly is happening. What does it do? Does it just really look at, does it really just scrape the charts and puts it in English? Or does it have some deeper understanding as to how things are linked, what we're trying to do, and how to create a model, how to create a story that's a lot more impactful by understanding real trends and relationships in the data. Just looked at the clock and wow, this video is a lot longer than initially intended for it to be. So if you guys stuck around till the end, thank you. I hope that you found this video pretty interesting, and I'm curious to see what you guys think about usefulness and applicability of Microsoft Copilot for Power BI. So now there's a couple of other instances or in other use cases for Copilot in Microsoft Fabric, and we will be reviewing the data flow use case and other use cases for Copilot, so stay tuned. If you have any questions, then the best way to get in touch with us is to go to www.obviEnce.com/contact. That will get right back to us, or you could leave a comment here at the video, and then we will check it every now and then and try to get back to you as quickly as possible. If you found that this video was useful and if you enjoyed it, we would appreciate the like and subscribe. We will see you soon as more videos like this are coming shortly.